everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have, boy, do we have an episode tonight, don't we, Landon?
Oh, yeah. We really like this guy.
Yeah, we have been waiting to have him on for a long time. This is our good friend, John Lundwall. How are you tonight, John?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me tonight.
Oh, excellent. No, I have to tell everybody, our viewers, the story of how we even met John. This is the randomness of our life here on Mormonish. And I guess the lesson is just be open to anything, right? And take advantage. So I did a podcast with Steve Pinecker, Mormon Book Reviews, and the lovely Maven from Mormon Stories and Mormonism Live. And we were covering this book, The Fate of the Persecutors of the Prophet Joseph Smith, which is full of fables and legends about the horrible fates of the people that were involved in the Carthage mob. So I'm putting out information about this episode. This book is written by a gentleman with the last name of Lundwall. And suddenly I get a message from someone else named Lundwall who says, what did you tell me, John?
I said, hey, that's my grandfather.
Said, hey, that's my grandpa. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And I always like to get extra information about any podcast we're putting out. So we started communicating, and it was interesting, the kinds of things that he had to say about the book. But even more interesting was to find out who John actually was. And I remember it was a Saturday afternoon and I was texting Landon on the side going, I just came across a really interesting person. Can you jump on a call? Let's talk about this. So we got John to do a special bonus event for The Good Book Club about his field of expertise, which we're going to get into. And just as we got to know John better and learn more about, the field that he's in and the work that he does, there's just so much more to it. We knew that eventually we would end up here on Mormonish. We even went on a field trip, didn't we, Landon and John, together?
Yeah, it was fun. We went to Fremont State Park, and
yep.
John's an expert on the pictographs and the petroglyphs and all the different.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite places in the world, Fremont Indian State Park, South Central Utah. I highly recommend it if you live nearby. Go check out the petroglyphs, the dark skies, the museum, camping.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a ball going. We took a group from the book club, and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, John's like a real life Indiana Jones, or as you call him, Indiana John.
Indiana John, the real deal. Well, and the fun thing about touring around with your own personal, archaeologist is that, we'd go up to a site and of course it's all gated off and we're normal tourists. We're like, okay, we'll just enjoy it. And John marches through our group with the key. He's literally got the key. He's able to unlock, it's incredible that, we can, of course, didn't go in, but we can see things, that were amazing. So that being said, I am going to read John's bio here, and then we are going to dive into our topic for tonight, which I guarantee you guys have probably never heard anything like this before. I think this is going to be one of our more mind-blowing episodes. Wouldn't you say, Landon?
Our minds were blown. For it. Yeah. I've been waiting for
I know.
A couple months since our field trip. He just blew our mind with some of these ideas. So
some of the ideas and information. So to introduce you to John, everybody, John Lundwall holds a doctorate in comparative myth and religious studies from Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, where he teaches as adjunct faculty. He has served on the editorial board for Cosmos and Logos, Journal of Myth, Religion, and Folklore, and is a founding board member of the Utah Valley Astronomy Club, a 501c3 organization that partners with state and national parks to run their astronomy and related programs. He is also the project manager of the Utah Cultural Astronomy Project and teams with a group of researchers, archaeologists, rock art specialists, and photographers to record and protect Native American rock art sites in Utah. He is an author of several articles, and his latest book, Mythos and Cosmos, Mind and Meaning in the Oral Age. So as you can see, this is a very special guest that we have. And as Landon alluded to, while we were on this field trip with him, and he was showing us all these amazing things, he started to talk about ancient America, relation to the Book of Mormon, and some ideas and concepts that we had never even thought about, never heard of before. So this is what we're bringing you tonight. And John is going to take it from here, and he has an incredible slide presentation for us. So everybody get your popcorn, listen up. This is going to be incredible.
Well, all right. I just ask questions, make comments as I go along, and let's enjoy the evening. Before I share my screen, I'm just going to give my little sort of intro into the subject matter we're going to cover tonight. About over 20 years ago, like 23 years ago, I was TBM, true believing member of the church. I come from generations of Mormons, and I was in a fireside with it was a religion professor from BYU Provo. The subject was the Old Testament, which was that year of study. I don't remember a word he said. It was rather unremarkable, but there was a Q&A session. And one of the questions did spark my interest. The question was, is there any mythology in the Old Testament, in the Bible? And of course, this is my area of study. Pacifica Graduate Institute is the Joseph Campbell School of Comparative Myth, where I received my graduate degree and where I teach. And this is what I've been studying and working on for 20 years in studying oral cultures, the epistemological origins of myth, and how that filters out through culture. So, but this was 23 years ago. I hadn't gone to graduate school yet. I was well enough read to know some basic facts, though. So I was really interested in what this professor had to say. And of course, the professor said there's no mythology in the Bible, because if you admit mythology in the Bible, then we have to admit mythology in the other books of scripture in the Mormon canon. Well, I mean, this was, as a TBM, I was face palming myself at the ridiculousness of this answer. And it got me wanting to write a paper. We've talked about that. Every time I come across a really good idea, I say, oh, that's worthy of writing a paper. And I wanted to write a paper from a TBM perspective, explaining the different ideological, epistemological differences in the different canons of scripture in Mormonism, because the Hebrew Bible is something completely different than the New Testament. And Mormonism treats them the same, but they're completely different. The Hebrew Bible has oral tradition embedded in it. The entire book of Genesis descends from oral tradition. And if you have oral tradition, you have myth. Myth is an oral product. So, but you don't have oral tradition. So you have parables in the New Testament. So you start getting into different genres of texts. And apparently this religion professor was oblivious to this. And so I just wanted to write a paper. And the cornerstone of this idea of mine I had 23 years ago was the Book of Mormon begins with literacy, with full literacy. Nephi is a literate writer. He creates the plates. He's got the brass plates. He's copying Isaiah in the text. The Book of Mormon begins with literacy. This has huge consequences for the kind of text the Book of Mormon is going to be and how different it is from the Hebrew Bible. Now, so my thinking is I have to read the Book of Mormon with orality and literacy in mind and write a paper from that perspective. Well, you know, life got busy. I went to graduate school and did all these other things. And I didn't actually sit down and read the Book of Mormon with orality and literacy in mind until about 2016. And in about 72 hours, I completely deconstructed the historicity of the text. It's demonstrably non-historical. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, sort of how it's demonstrably non-historical. So let me share my screen.
Yeah, these concepts were just incredible to us as you were talking about it. I think we made the joke, the title of Liberty itself and the writing on it debunks itself. And I think we'll get into that. So the whole concept, you know, because I think people do believe the writing. I mean, they were fully literate as we are. And you explained that is not a reality in a culture like that with the oral traditions. So.
Yeah, what I thought was awesome when we were talking, John, was you and maybe you're going to get in this on the slide show, so I don't want to steal the thunder, but talked about how different oral people are from literate people who are literate and write, that it's a completely different thinking mindset, that you think differently when you can write versus when you can only pass things on orally.
It's a completely different cognitive envelope. There are two entirely different epistemologies of truth. And it turns out in the Americas, in Mesoamerica, even though there was writing, the kind of writing they had is not the kind of writing that composes the Hebrew Bible or the assumptions of the Book of Mormon. The kind of writing in Mesoamerica cannot produce the text of the Book of Mormon, not ever. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about that tonight.
Wow.
You can see my screen?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, we can see everything.
We're not going to get through my entire presentation. I already told you, it's when I sat down and read the Book of Mormon strictly through the lens of orality and literacy, I was able to come up with 5 theses that are demonstrable. And so we're going to talk tonight about the first 2. And maybe I'll bore you. Maybe you'll never want to speak to me again. If you're interested, we can do the next 3 in a different session.
Yeah, no, we would love to. We would absolutely love it. And I understand this is such a comprehensive subject that, you have to start little baby steps with us and our viewers to explain it. So we'll definitely have future episodes.
About a week's worth of graduate school lecture in an hour. And I have to do it so it's interesting and understandable. And it turns out that requires a serious amount of genius, which I do not have. So I do have some
I wouldn't sell yourself short, John.
We'll see how it goes. Okay, I have 5 theses that I'm going to present tonight, really just the first 2, but they are these. 1, the greatest anachronism in the Book of Mormon is the text itself. So there are problems in the Book of Mormon with anachronisms: steel, horses, coinage, barley, wheat, right? There are textual problems, textual anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. The biggest one is Deutero-Isaiah. And I'm not going to go over that. You know what Deutero-Isaiah is, chapters that should not be in the Book of Mormon because they were written generations after Isaiah. They couldn't have been in the brass plates. And so Mormon scholars have struggled to explain Deutero-Isaiah. It is a textual anachronism. My point tonight is that not only is Deutero-Isaiah an anachronism in the Book of Mormon, but so is every other chapter. The entire text is anachronistic, and we can show why. Point 2, a tight translation. Once you understand the cognitive envelope of the Americas, of literacy, of how all this works, then dominoes start falling. Point 2, a tight translation is impossible, and a loose translation is an act of violence. So if your audience remembers anything of tonight's presentation, that's it. A tight translation is impossible. A loose translation is even worse. It's an act of violence. It's my second thesis. My third thesis: the text of the Book of Mormon cannot be derived from the description of the gold plates. This has been talked about in other podcasts and other people. However, I do add a few new elements to the analysis. The Book of Mormon characters are fabricated and can be falsified. These are the characters written by John Whitmer, but there are other characters, including a few characters written by Oliver Cowdery, Frederick Williams, and even the Egyptian grammar shares the same attributes as these other characters. And as you analyze them, looking at ancient writing systems, you can falsify them. You can say, these are fabricated, these are made up, these cannot compose the text of the Book of Mormon. And thesis 5, the standard of proof for the Book of Mormon. I didn't set the standard of proof for the Book of Mormon. You didn't set the standard of proof for the Book of Mormon. The Mormon prophets set the standard of proof for the Book of Mormon. And that standard resides only in a tight translation and its literal historicity, and that's impossible. So this is an insurmountable problem. Of course, there are many ways to surmount an insurmountable problem, and that is to redefine the problem until no one's looking at it. But all right, those are the 5 theses. We are going to spend the bulk of time on number 1. And in order to do that, I'm going to talk about, well, this is how I'm entering this conversation. The greatest anachronism in the Book of Mormon is the text itself. The kind of historiography the text displays requires a specific kind of literacy that emerged in history with the development of reductive alphabetic writing systems and scholastic priests whose religious thoughts were rooted primarily in symbols and syllables as opposed to the manifestations of nature. Such a cognitive model, once established, catches on wherever literacy spreads, and such a cognitive model never occurred in the pre-colonial New World. So that's the thesis. There is a specific kind of literacy that produces a specific kind of thought world that produces the Book of Mormon. That never existed in any of the Americas, not Mesoamerica, North America, South America. We can show it never existed. We can look at the writing systems of Mesoamerica, show what kind of writing systems they were, and that in fact, it cannot produce the text of the Book of Mormon. So all we're left with then is a loose translation, which will end tonight's presentation with why loose translation is actually offensive. It's more problematic.
You sound offended, John. You do. Can I ask you one question?
You bet.
So I know that some people might say, well, there's no evidence now, this was lost. This is not something that can be lost, right? Once there's that level of writing, that style of literacy, it's not going to be lost completely. There's going to be evidence.
Absolutely. No, once basically we're talking about an alphabetic script, which produces a different kind of analytical literate thought. And once that catches on, it's so easy to use simply because Mayan writing has 800, 900 characters, symbols in their writing system. You have symbols that represent syllables, but you also have symbols that represent words, right? Chinese has 10,000 characters. They have a symbol for a word, right? And how many words are in your vocabulary? You can have thousands. So these picture writing or logo syllabaries generally are pretty complex. And historically, they're associated with a kind of thinking, which we're going to talk about tonight. Well, that's the Mayan world. Once you invent an alphabet, your writing system is reduced to 22, 24 characters. Instead of hundreds or thousands, you have a couple dozen. Each character represents a sound, and you put them together to make words. And there are cognitive consequences for that development. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And yes, I've got, in order to get into this, I'm going to start with this book here, 1964, Understanding Media. It's written by Marshall McLuhan. It's not a very exciting title, but when the book was published, it actually made an international stir. The thesis of the book can be summarized in this sentence: the medium is the message. Maybe you've heard that before. The medium is the message. His thesis is, in every society, there are communication systems, and we listen to the communication for the message. We think the message is the most important part of the communication system, but it's not. The medium, how the message is communicated, is the more important part, because the medium is the thing that structures society. We listen to the communication for the message, but the medium of the message is the thing that structures society. So let me give you an example of what he's talking about. And I'm going to give you a broad general example by using a watering well. When you build a well everybody goes to it for the water. The water is the message. The hole in the ground is the medium. Nobody cares about the hole in the ground. They just go there to get the water, right? But if you get a successful well, the first thing that happens is you build your village next to it, right? So the village gets built next to the well. Then everyone goes to the well, and that's where you meet your neighbor. You're drawing water, and that's where you share your news. Literally, the well is the water cooler. In the Bible, whenever a bachelor wanted a mate, he would go to a well and meet the woman at the well, because the well was also the singles bar, right? It was where people met to do further social relations, and it's built next to the village. Well, also, here in this example, people build troughs near the well and they bring their animals. It doesn't take long before Joe says, hey, Larry, how much do you want for your goat? How much do you want for your pony? How much do you want for your cow? And then a marketplace gets established near the well. Well, if there's a marketplace, the chief of the village says, I want to get in on the action. So he taxes the road to the well. And the medium structures thought this one's a little bit more esoteric, but it turns out in the ancient world, almost every temple or church was built next to a well. And it was done so on ideological grounds. The well was the symbolic source of the waters of life. So the church and the temple were the manifestations, the axis mundi that produced the waters of life. And so you built a well or water source next to it, not only to, so that the priests and priestesses could drink, but it was an ideological, mythological requirement. Okay. In medieval Europe, almost every church has a well. It used to have a well and a tree next to it because the tree was the pre-Christian axis mundi, the center of the village. They had a tree and a well. The Christians came in, and very often the tree got cut down and was used to build the church, but the well remained. Okay. One of McLuhan's insights is the content of one medium will be another medium. And I have here a natural watering hole. For generations, hunter-gatherers went to watering holes to get their water. And then one day, one of them thought, why don't we just dig our own watering hole? And they invented the well, right? And then when the well was invented, suddenly the village got invented next to it. And then all these other things begin outflowing from it. So McLuhan's insight is if you innovate the medium, the entire structure of society will change around it. And I'm just giving you this rather bland example of how a watering well will structure the society around it. Now let's use an actual example in history with an information medium. The printing revolution. There's a great book. It's called The Printing Revolution in Europe by Elizabeth Eisenstein. It would be great for your book club. It sounds like boring, but I have to say, no. It was a page turner for me. It's actually a 3-volume work, but there's a 1-volume synopsis of it. And she just goes through and shows how the invention of the printing press, the Gutenberg printing press, changed everything. Now, there's other things involved. But without the printing press, you could not have the scientific revolution. The Protestant Reformation may have never gotten off its feet. Political revolutions like the American Revolution needed the printing press. All these things were occurring because the change of the information medium changed. So let's just briefly talk about that. And rather than just going through this slide, I thought we would just read a couple paragraphs out of her book. Do you want me to do that? Do you want to do that?
Everyone knows I can't ever see a slide. Even though I have these reading glasses on my head, they're just to hold my hair in place. So I'll let you two read, but I also wanted to comment, of course, printing presses have a very pivotal role in Mormonism too. So it goes through the centuries, right?
Yeah. And, yes. And I don't think there's any doubt that the internet, how it changed Mormonism as
compare, yeah, you can compare that to the printing press. So yes, please read on. Let's find out what's going on.
Okay. You want me to read that, John? Yeah. Both of them or just one at a time? Or?
Yeah, do both of them, one at a time, whatever you want to do. I got a few slides. We're going to read a few paragraphs.
No problem.
That's just going to summarize some of her ideas.
As communion with the Sunday paper has replaced church going, there is a tendency to forget that sermons had at one time been coupled with news about local and foreign affairs, real estate transactions, and other mundane matters. After printing, however, news gathering and circulation were handled more efficiently under lay auspices. The displacement of pulpit by press is significant not only in connection with secularization, but also because it points to an explanation for the weakening of local community ties. To hear an address delivered, people have to come together. To read a printed report encourages individuals to draw apart. And the next point is, as long as text could be duplicated only by hand, perpetuation of the classical heritage rested precariously on the shifting requirements of local elites. Texts imported into one region depleted supplies in others. The enrichment of certain fields of study by an infusion of ancient learning impoverished other fields of study by diverting scribal labor. Systematization came only after the humanist impulse could be combined with new features supplied by print culture.
All right. So to sum up, the printing press displaced the pulpit because the newspaper is where people began getting their news, which they read in their living room, where they used to have to go to church to get the news in the local village. Okay. So the church was built next to the well, and they did the secular news at the well. They did everything else in the church. But then the invention of the printing press, well, then you no longer had to get your news at the church. So just that, over a couple generations, began a major social change throughout Europe. Okay, and not only that is as she says, it led to the weakening of local community ties. You gathered every week at church to get the news, to talk about the news, to gossip. Well, suddenly people stopped doing that, right? Well, not suddenly, over time, they stopped doing that. More importantly is this second point. Libraries in medieval Europe were owned only by the royalty, by the elite, because they were the only ones who could afford them. Manuscripts were hand copied. That is enormously time consuming, enormously expensive. Because you're paying, you don't have a printing press, you have to pay and feed and clothe people who are your printing press, right? It's your monastery. Your monastery is creating the text. And so only the rich have texts, only the monks are copying the text. With the invention of the printing press, suddenly this dynamic changes. It's still expensive to produce a book, by the way, but it's infinitely cheaper than having a human being copy it. And so suddenly, not only can royalty own text, but the merchant class, what we would call the middle class, but the merchant class can now own texts. And they do. And suddenly libraries start getting built throughout Europe by the merchant class. This has never happened before. And when that starts happening, other things start changing. Let's read a few more of these changes. I'll read this first paragraph. During the first centuries of printing, old texts were duplicated more rapidly than new ones. On this basis, most authorities conclude that printing did not speed up the adoption of new theories. But where did these new theories come from? Right? You had the classic canon of literature, and those were the books that were copied most. And when the printing press was developed, those were the first books printed, right? But then after, about a century, suddenly you get a flood of all these new ideas which underwrite the scientific revolution. Landon, do you want to read that second paragraph?
Yeah, much as maps from different regions and epochs were brought into contact in the course of preparing editions of atlases, so too were technical texts brought together in certain physicians' and astronomers' libraries. Contradictions became more visible, divergent traditions more difficult to reconcile. Not only was confidence in old theories weakened, but an enriched reading matter also encouraged the development of new intellectual combinations and permutations. Increased output directed at relatively stable markets, in short, created conditions that favored new combinations of old ideas at first, and then later on the creation of entirely new systems of thought.
So there it is. You start putting in, you start seeing texts side by side, which you've never seen before. And they're the older texts, the authoritative ones. And when you put them side by side, you can start seeing some of these contradict each other. That doesn't sound right. We disproved that. Larry disproved that in the next village over. You start seeing the problems with the texts when you have them in front of you as easily as the printing press allows for. And this is what starts creating a plethora of new ideas, where you start deconstructing those texts and innovating new ideas. And this spurs on the scientific revolution. It's impossible for the scientific revolution. It's hard to imagine the scientific revolution occurring without the printing press. It's the innovation of this medium that allows for these permutations of new ideas to happen.
And I think we see that with like the documentary hypothesis with the Old Testament, where they were able to start laying out the Old Testament side by side and started seeing, oh my gosh, this is, they're using the name of God always in this, and they started deconstructing that.
That is correct.
The Reformation. So,
So look, they started deconstructing secular texts first, because the Bible was sola scriptura. It was
off limits.
Don't touch it.
A couple centuries for scholars to say, hey, we can do this to the Bible as well. And that is the birth of the documentary hypothesis. It's the birth of biblical criticism, right? They started to treat the Bible like any other text, and there's a lot to learn with that methodology. Incredible amounts to learn with that methodology.
Well, and they had to wait until they weren't going to be burnt at the stake, right? There had to be a little appreciation of scholarship without that threat hanging over your head. Then they could move forward. So.
That is correct. There are all kinds of tensions. None of this was an easy process, right? Mm-hmm. Writing the first English Bible, well, I think he was burned at the stake. Wasn't
a lot of them were.
So, none of this was easy. We have to remember that there's no real separation between church and state, right? And so if you're going to deconstruct the Bible, this is taking down the political party as well. Right. And how's that going to work out for you? No, it's not. But while we're at it, the printing press is also underwriting the Reformation. So this is a killer blow to the church, Catholicism. So how does it underwrite the Great Reformation? Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the cathedral door and says, look, the church is corrupt. Here are all the problems with it. But then Martin Luther does something that the Catholic Church could never overcome. He makes a pamphlet, and then he mass produces the pamphlet. Hundreds of thousands of copies flood throughout Europe. Now, the Catholic Church has a Latin-speaking priest at the pulpit sharing the news, right? They've been doing this for centuries. And suddenly, there's a brand new medium, the pamphlet, and everyone's gone. And the Catholic priest has no ability to combat it. And so the ideas of the Reformation are born through the revolution of the printing pamphlet and the printing press. And sure enough, that just changes the religious and political landscape of Europe as a result. And sure enough, as you mentioned already, the internet is to Mormonism what the printing press is to Catholicism. Yep. It is the new medium that there is no response for, because now you have to stand up and account for your history, which you've hidden, right? That's not tonight's presentation. But, however, the internet is the equivalent to the printing press in Mormonism. So
I was going to say, and podcasts are the equivalent of the pamphlet.
That is correct. That's correct.
Flood the earth.
So it's here to stay. It'll never go away. And so Catholicism simply had to grind through it. And of course, Catholicism is the global church, so it's not going to go away. But there are definite parallels. The parallels are paramount. All right, I'm not going to talk about the revolutions because I need to move on, and I'm already behind my
Your timetable
clock.
there. It's just
All
so
right.
interesting.
So look, I just shared The Medium is the Message. This is this book. It was really interesting. It created quite a stir because in 1964, the computer was being developed. And everyone wanted to know how the computer was going to change civilization. So that's why it was such a popular book. I don't think anyone had any idea about TikTok or Twitter.
Who can see that, honestly?
Right.
The church certainly didn't see that coming.
No. So. Very few people took this idea and went backwards in time. And this is also, this produces a lot of insight. So in a lot of my work, this is what I do. I take this idea, the medium is the message, and I go backwards in time, and we can see the certain contours of history and how they change with the development of writing systems, and literacy, and the social, economic, political, and religious changes that occur as those things evolve. And that is what we're going to spend the next 30 minutes on. So look, there are, each one of these medallions is a different medium of how civilization transmitted their ideas. For 98% of human history, if not longer, there was no writing. Okay? There wasn't even a concept of writing. People lived in orality, no writing whatsoever. Human beings are at least 100,000. The Homo sapien is 200,000 years old with the brain size and walking upright. 100,000 years is modern Homo sapien. 70,000 BCE, we have burials, art. 50,000 BCE, we have art, right? So we have the cognitive Homo sapien at least for 100,000 years, if not longer. Writing is invented 3,400 BCE. Okay, and so for almost all of history, human beings were oral. We're going to talk about orality is a certain kind of well that produces certain functions, cognitive structures. Just like the well in my example, orality produces certain kind of cognitive structures. Then writing is invented. Now here's the problem. Even today, most scholars assume that as soon as writing is invented, people start thinking in literate ways, thinking by text, but they don't. It takes 2,500 years for the mentality and cognitive structure of primary orality to merge into literacy. And during that time, you have what's called secondary orality. You have writing, but generally less than 5% of your population is literate. And the writing serves only as a tool that functions as support for the oral world. Okay. So you're not getting research libraries during this time. The writing almost always is used as a supplement for ritual. Okay. Writing is a supplement for ritual during this time. We'll show examples. But what does happen with the invention of writing is certain things are really useful with writing, such as economic affairs, contracts, inventories, receipts, right? Treaties.
That's kind of what the first Sumerian writings was
the majority of early writings so far that we found are these kinds of writings. Yeah. There's tens of thousands of tablets in the Near East, and it's these kinds of economic writings. And what that allows for is the increase of trade and social complexity. The emergence of writing comes with the emergence of the city-state. And over generations of writing, you get the birth of empire, where you are organizing and controlling several city-states under one centralized government. That's what writing is helping to do. The government and the religion is still being operated under orality, the demands of orality. However, the social complexity and the commerce begins growing exponentially with the introduction of writing. Then something happens. And it's like the invention of the printing press before the printing press. And that is an alphabet is invented. Now, the early scripts are logosyllabaries. They're logo, picture, syllabary, syllable. They're picture syllables. It's a symbol that represents either a syllable, a consonant, and a vowel, or a word, right? And so the early scripts have hundreds of characters. Egyptian hieroglyphs has 900 characters. And some of them are syllables, right? They wrote phonetically using their hieroglyphs. Most of them are words or concepts. And many of them are really hard to are actually untranslatable because they belong to this oral world, which we're going to talk about, the cognitive structure of that oral world. Well, when the alphabet is invented, something happens. We'll talk about that, but essentially, your referent of meaning changes from what you observe to nature to symbols on a page. And when that happens, brand new structures begin to develop in society. We'll talk about that. All right, so that's what we are, going to focus on. Here is the cognitive envelope of orality. I promise you we're going to get to the Book of Mormon, but all this is groundwork.
Exactly.
So when I enter into the world of the Americas, North America, Mesoamerica, South America, you understand what is happening and where I'm coming from. So here we go. Here is the oral cognitive structure. When there's no writing, there are aspects of orality that we have permanently lost. It's an epistemological wall. However, when there's no writing, your primary referent for meaning is what you see, right? And so nature is what you see. And so nature becomes your vocabulary for pretty much everything. And in our textbooks, we're told that primitive peoples, and this has evolved in the past few decades, thank God, but the training is primitive peoples were nature worshipers. Well, it's problematic in that oral peoples have only nature as their printing press, only what they observe. Okay, so here's what happens. You want to hunt, and the herds come into the valley that you hunt at a specific time. Oral peoples are remarkably ingenious with their observations of nature. They know every function of every plant, every bird, every animal, and more than that, the celestial cycles. And so what happens is a certain star rises on the horizon before dawn, and that signals the winds, that signals the seasonal change, which brings in the animals that migrate into the valley, which you hunt. So what do? In your vocabulary, you personify all those functions. The star, the wind, maybe they migrate in a specific, you hunt them in a specific canyon. So you mark a mountain where that canyon is at, and then the animal. You personify each one of those things, and they each become a deity. Orality produces polytheism. Polytheism is a product of oral cognition, period. So this is a very important point to make because it's literacy that produces monotheism. Without writing, you have to divide up the functions of nature just to remember. You got to pass all this information down. When do the herds come in? When's the best time? Well, the best place to hunt them is near this mountain, and it comes in when the season changes, and the star announces that season change, and here's the ritual we do for the hunt. So they combine all these things, they personify all these things, and that becomes your memory press. Okay?
So that's why universally we see almost every society, no matter what continent they were on, they all seem to line things up with the solstices and the equinoxes because that's how they're keeping track of everything.
So this is a cognitive well. One of the things orality produces is polytheism or henotheism. I'm not going to get into all this, but henotheism is one God with a divine subordinates who help run the cosmos, right? So there is a tendency towards monotheism, but in an oral world without writing, you have to divide up the functions of the cosmos using a polytheistic or a henotheistic system, period. That's one natural consequence of orality. Two is oral peoples think cosmologically. They are tracking everything. And what scholars forgot until a few decades ago is that the biggest part of nature is the sky. And they tracked the sun, moon, and stars. Most cultures, you don't have to track every star, but some of them did, right? The Egyptians had fastidiously tracked, imprinted the entire celestial dome and ritualized it, right? The pyramid wouldn't get a man to the moon, but that was not its purpose. Its purpose was to bring the moon down to man, right? By analogically copying it in ritual. You took the cycle of the sun, moon, and stars, and you performed a dance with how many days or months it took for that to cross the sky. That's how many steps in your dance. And you danced the cosmos. You danced the calendar. That was the relationship they had. So, all right. So they think
see, that's the mind-blowing stuff. That is the mind-blowing stuff that and how you describe that none of us could ever even remotely have the cognition that they did. We cannot put ourselves in that oral mindset at all. There's no way we can understand it. We can learn things like this, but we could never try to recreate that. It just doesn't happen.
Yes. There's an ancient Greek writer, I forget his name, but we only have a couple scraps of his writing. And one of those scraps says the entire doctrine of Pythagoras, the school of Pythagoras, he's credited in our modern history of science books, as the first to numerically write out the harmonic scale, right? Here are all the ratios, here are all the mathematics. Well, this Greek writer says the entire doctrine of Pythagoras was revealed in a dance, right? And so we think of the school of Pythagoras as a bunch of, scholastic priests writing in scripts, but actually most of them were dancing. They danced the text because the text was, so this is at the cusp of the change between orality and literacy. And so this is, this is part of the world that we have utterly forgotten. We
might enjoy math a little more if you got to dance more than that.
That's my favorite theorem, by the way. The Pythagorean theorem, my favorite.
Sure enough. So they observe the cosmos, the ground and the sky, right? All of nature. They observe that, they personify it, they think cosmologically, they're polytheistic. Just to divide up all the functions of nature, you have to be polytheistic without writing, okay? And then you tell your narrative. So then you make a narrative that expresses all of this. And your narrative is in oral cultures is generally filled with outsized events, creatures, heroes, because they're easier to remember, right? And so you have these grandiose tales that are memorable tales. And here's the thing, ancient myth, I could do 6 podcasts just on ancient myth, but ancient myth was not a campfire story. In most cultures, certain myths could only be told at a certain time. It's when that star rose on the horizon. When they saw that star, now is the time to tell that myth, that story. In oral cultures, myth is not a fabricated story. Myth is a representation of reality, of ultimate reality. In oral cultures, truth is cosmic fact, these principles of nature, okay? In literate cultures, truth is historic fact. We've changed the rules of the game. And as a result, we've been misinterpreting Genesis for generations, because the book of Genesis began in oral tradition where truth was cosmic fact, and we turned it into historic fact, and now it's cats and dogs living together. So So you tell a narrative, the narrative has to be told in a specific way at a specific time. But in oral cultures, you have to tell your narrative in as many different ways as possible in order to remember them. So you have a oral narrative that you tell, but then you have a ritual that you also perform that is a recitation of the narrative. You perform the narrative in dance, in song, in chant, in ritual, in festival. All of that gets interlaid with each other. And those are all done at specific times. And you do all this in a specific place, the sacred place, the temenos, the place to dance, the place to see. And that is how oral cultures pass down information. You know, it's more complicated, but there's the graphic. That's the cognitive well. And that produces certain kinds of thinking. It produces astrology, right? For thousands of years, people thought astrologically, because literally they watched that star rise on the horizon and the herds migrate into the valley. And they said, oh my gosh, the star is causing the herds to migrate into the valley. What else do the stars cause to happen? And suddenly everyone thinks astrologically. You know, in our modern sense, we think that's ridiculous, but that's actually very rational oral observation. What it is. Wow. So they think astrologically, they think cosmologically, they think polytheistically, they use sacred narrative, outrageous narrative. Their narratives tend to repeat the cosmogon, the creation. Central to all these oral societies is their creation story. Most of them are told in conjunction with the flood story, or rather the flood story is told in conjunction with the creation story. There are reasons for that. So these are all the products of the oral cognitive model. Well, then writing's invented, and for 2,500 years, nothing much changes in this oral cognitive model. This is what we forget. Here's a picture I took. I'm inside the sarcophagus chamber of the Pyramid of Unas, where the first pyramid texts appear. This is the earliest religious writing in history that we've got. 2300 BC, Pyramid of Unas. Behind me is the sarcophagus. And as you can see, the walls are completely covered in text. Every wall and hallway is completely covered in text in this area. Well, what are the texts? The texts are rituals, right? It's not a sermon. It's not doctrines. It's not Bruce R. McConkie, right? It's not history. All those are literate artifacts. This is a very important point. We're going to return to it again and again tonight. Those things are literate artifacts. What we're looking at here is cosmology, astrology, ritual. They looked at, you know, a certain star rose when the certain star rose heliacally right before the dawn of sunrise when the Nile flooded. And this brought in the fertility of the crops. So the star had the power of birth, of generation, of fertility. Well, if I perform a ritual that encodes the power of that star into the ritual, I now can be reborn, right? This is what they're doing with these texts. They're performing a ritual to be reborn in the next life. And this is the product of oral thinking, okay? The texts are subservient to the demands of the oral society. All right. Okay, now here's the big shift. You know, the Chinese invented a printing press 1,000 years before Gutenberg. They didn't have a scientific revolution. Things developed, right? The printing press, they used porcelain tablets. It was like stamps. You know, the stamping culture, everyone was stamping craft books for a couple
Everything
years,
was stamped.
Right? Yes, yes.
I'm glad that was stamped out. It's not so big anymore.
So anyway, their printing press was porcelain stamps, but the problem, it's not a problem, it's just a reality that their writing system had 10,000 characters. It took a lifetime for someone to become proficient in it. And when you spend your lifetime just learning the writing system, there's no time to permutate texts right next to each other like the Europeans did with a reductive alphabetic writing system. So the alphabet is invented. I'm not going to get into the history of the invention of the alphabet. The earliest example we have is about 1800 BCE, but the Phoenicians, really, the Proto-Canaanite alphabet is 1400 BCE. And it takes generations for the thought structures of the alphabet to embed itself into human thinking. But here's what happens. All before, everyone's looking at the star and the wind and the sun and the herds coming in. That was your printing press, right? Suddenly, you're not looking at that anymore. With an alphabet, you've just got a couple dozen characters that are written in symbols that are no longer pictures. They're just abstract symbols. They started out as pictures, but over time, they just become abstract symbols. And you write them on a parchment or on papyri, and you are thinking now using text. You're no longer out there looking at the herds in the mountain and the winds you're thinking using text. And this changes everything, because text now becomes decoupled from nature, from the ritual. You can now just start playing with ideas in your mind. Before, there's very little innovation in oral societies. One, it's very hard to innovate because if you do, you'll die. but two,
there is that.
Yeah. But two, oral thinking is very conservative. Using that word in its technical sense, you literally do everything you can to conserve the tradition, to transmit it from from generation to generation. Alphabetic writing, when writing turns into an abstract symbol on a page, you are released from a lot of the strictures that orality imposes on you. You now just begin thinking in concepts. Now you can do that previously. There's no tight lines, there's overlap. But what you get then are the Greek schools. You get Pythagoras and Parmenides, Plato and Aristotle. This is part of the Greek revolution, which is the literate revolution. They have detached themselves from the cult, the ritual, and the cosmology of nature, and they are just playing with ideas on paper, on stone, on papyri. And this allows for a layer of abstraction and complexity that is different. Now, again, oral thinking has certain kinds of complexity. Remember, the entire doctrine of Pythagoras was revealed in a dance, right? Yeah, we have no blueprints for the Great Pyramid. We have certain deities that show up, Sneferu and Thought, and the deities of number, of writing. They show up with their sticks and their incantations and their spells. And from that, the Great Pyramid appears out of the sand. Clearly, sophisticated things are going on in this oral tradition, in this secondary oral tradition. However, the thought structures change when literacy develops. And part of that is a certain kind of materialism, that they invent a mechanical universe, right? This is the universe of the spheres, Claudius Ptolemy. But the biggest part is monotheism. Now, look, if you are, if you have no writing and you're personifying all your principles of nature just to remember them, you do that by personifying them into deities. If you can abstract all of these deities into one principle and write about it on a page, then you get monotheism. And monotheism the Israelites were not monotheistic. All you have to do is read the Bible to know that they were all polytheistic until the writing of the Torah. And what happens? Well, the writing of the Torah is when the temple is sacked, 587, Nebuchadnezzar comes in, Babylonian sacks Jerusalem, and the oral tradition, which is rooted in the temple where they did their dances, watched the stars, did all of that, was destroyed. They were enslaved. They went to Babylon, and they made this radical change it changed everything. And that is, they said, we're going to make our religion textual. We're going to write it down. And they wrote it down using an alphabetic script because they're reading ideas on a page. This allows for monotheism to take hold. It's never going to take hold before that. And so now you have monotheism, but then you get other things. You start playing with the text, and the text becomes its own medium, right? And so you start creating complex textual parallelisms, allegories, allusions. All this is only possible because you're dealing with an alphabetic text with abstract symbols that allows you to play with these literary structures on a parchment. Okay. This births monotheism. This births biblical religion. And this is what the Book of Mormon is entirely. So suddenly we're going to run into some problems. Any questions so far?
So
No,
I
it's
want to make
absolutely
sure
fascinating.
we're talking 600 BC when the Babylonians come in, and they come back from Babylon. Ezra puts together the law into a text. And so we're talking after Lehi and his family supposedly have already left, before we get this textual, literary thinking going on in the Jerusalem area.
Correct. So look, the Torah is written late 6th century, 5th century, 500, 400s BCE. There's all kinds of arguments. Some scholars actually argue for even a later date of the writing of the Torah. When I originally thought of my paper 23 years ago, 600 BCE is sort of the early end of this transition, right? Lots of things start happening at 600 BC. You get the birth of all these new religions: Zoroastrianism, Jainism, the ethical reforms of Isaiah and Jeremiah, Buddhism. All these religions are happening approximately at the same time, and they're all transitioning from public cosmogonic ritual into private ethical theology.
Well, that answers a huge question, because in our book club we read about the world religions, and that was one of the things we were seeing was 600 BC was when we were seeing all these religions come out, and that explains it, because the alphabet developed to the point that they could spread that way.
Right. So that is correct.
Is amazing.
You got different kinds of writing systems, but by 600 BCE, the Mediterranean, the Near East, Egypt is flooded with these. Well, first off, it's Hellenistic thought that takes over this world, and that world is dominated by alphabetic writing, literate thinking. Where would Nephi be at 600 BCE? It's hard to say. Isaiah is a school of literate priests, right? So the transition in Judaism starts at about this time with Isaiah and Jeremiah. Probably the earliest parts of the Torah are probably songs, hymns, and rituals, right? I mean, so the earliest text in the Hebrew Bible is the hymn of the wife of Moses in Exodus. They think it's written around 900, but it's a ritual hymn. It's a ritual song. They're singing a ritual, right? So this is part of that older world, that older cognitive model. Not only do you get monotheism, okay, so now here you go. This slide right here. Oral people mythologize history. They have no choice. Without writing, how do you keep a history? You don't, right? You need sources and footnotes, and they don't have any of that, right? They tell history through legendary mythological tales that repeat the cosmogony. Oral peoples mythologize history. Literate peoples historicize myth. We take the oral tradition and we turn it all into myth. To oral people, truth is cosmic fact. To literate people, truth is historical fact. Not only is monotheism a product of literacy, History is a product of literacy. That is the genre of history, of writing history as event A led to event B, led to event C. This person said this to this person, wrote this to this person, killed this person. That kind of historical thinking is a product of literacy. That's not happening. Oral peoples don't do that. Secondary oral peoples don't do that. I'm going to give you an example here real quick. I promise you we'll get to the Book of Mormon. How are we doing?
This is well. I don't care. This is fantastic.
Yeah, we don't care. If no one else watches this, we're just going to watch this over.
That's right. We'll watch it over and over.
It's just us three.
But no, these concepts are incredible. No, it is, because we think that way. We can't not think that way. We look at history. One thing leads to another. We can't even imagine just having a view that's just, you know what I mean? It's just right.
In fact, just what you're doing, where you are. Yeah, just as we're having the discussion, I'm going back saying, "Oh, that's 600."
I remember
and then
that.
Ezra came at this time, and then and I'm walking it right through.
We're products of our time. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, what we'll learn here shortly is Mesoamerica. Truth is cosmic fact. It's not historical fact. In the Book of Mormon, truth is historical fact.
Yes.
It's not cosmic fact. There's a huge shift. Now, again, apologists can argue loose translation. I'm just going to argue right now, a tight translation becomes extremely problematic. Actually, it becomes impossible. So let me give you an example of how oral and secondary oral peoples write history. In their cosmovision, truth is cosmic fact, right? They're still attaching everything to the functions of nature. Okay. So they don't write history. They create genealogy. So-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. They create kings lists, but they do create somewhat historical narratives, but they're mythologized. So I'm going to give you an example of that just so you understand, because this example also explains how the Mayan wrote their histories. Okay. Here we have the Temple of Luxor, Karnak. This is the North Gate. This is the West Pylon. This is the East Pylon. I've superimposed what's actually carved on these bricks. There's a big scene carved, and it's a historical battle. Ramses II is in a battle. He's fighting the Hittites in the Levant, and it's a real battle. In fact, it's probably the best attested to battle we have in history. This happens 1275 BCE. Okay. Both the Hittites and the Egyptians write about it. So we know it happened. We know some details about it. Both claim they were victors. So it turns out politics never changes, right? They both won. All right.
Sounds like an apologist debate.
It does. We both won.
That's right. For the longest time, when scholars looked at this panel, they just said it was a radical piece of propaganda, political propaganda, because the way the narrative is told, well, it's interesting. Let's look at it. So here is, I got to move that. Here's the Battle of Kadesh. It happens 1274 BCE, Egyptians versus the Hittites near the Orontes River. There's over 5,000 chariots involved. It's probably the largest chariot battle in history. Now, what we know is Ramses, it was probably a draw. The Egyptians didn't win any additional territory. Neither did the Hittites. But what seems to have happened is the Egyptians had 3 divisions, and one of them was cut off and was about to be slaughtered, and Ramses saved it. And so that's the victory. He saved his army from being decimated. Anyway, I said, good, that's good. And so that's about what we know. But here's how the narrative, the historical narrative, is told on the wall. There's text written below the images, and we have part of it saying, this is Ramses charging into the Hittite horde, and we have, no officer was with me, no charioteer, no soldiers of the army, no shield bearer. My infantry, my chariotry yielded before them. Not one of them stood firm to fight with them. In other words, Ramses enters the fray all alone. All of his army has fallen away, and it's he against the entire Hittite army, mono horde.
Of course.
Right. So here we have the West panel. here is Ramses. He's facing west, and before him are 6 chariots. And this is him driving into the battle, and all around is the Hittite horde. So he is facing the horde all by himself. Interestingly enough, Ramses is duplicated, almost twice the size, facing east, receiving prayers and alms from priests. Now, here's what's interesting. Here's another part of the text. And it was a French Egyptologist, early 1900s, who noticed that if the 6 chariots emerging out of the westward facing Ramses represented an hour of the night, he's facing west where the sun sets. And there are 12 hours in the underworld. And 6 hours takes you to midnight in the underworld, which is the darkest part of the underworld. And here in the funerary texts, the darkest part of the underworld is where the soul is at its most desperate part of the journey. And if it can pass that point, it will join with the sun and reemerge out of the underworld and rise and gain immortality. Okay? It's the underworld journey of the sun wed to the circuit of immortality. Well, what do we have here? I call to you, my father Ammon. I am among a host of strangers. All countries are arrayed against me. I am alone. There is none with me. So at the middle of the night, King Ramses is all alone and he prays to Ammon. Well, then on the east panel, Ramses joins with the sun, and at sunrise, he's facing east towards the sunrise. He rises with Ammon. Ammon speaks, forward, I am with you. This is the God. I, your father, my hand is with you. I prevail over 100,000 men. I am Lord of victory, lover of valor. So at the rising of the sun, Ramses declares, I was like Ray when he rises at dawn. My rays, they burned the rebels' bodies. Thereupon they stood at a distance, kissing the ground before me. So single-handedly, Ramses defeats the entire Hittite army. And so it is a piece of political propaganda. This isn't historical. But what is being conveyed here is truth as cosmic fact. They're representing Ramses was victorious. How was he victorious? Because it was the sun god Re that he repeated the journey of Re. And so it was his prayer at midnight, all alone in the underworld, where he joins with the sun, rises in the east, and defeats the Hittite horde. The entire narrative follows the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the descent and ascent in and out of the underworld. This is truth as cosmic fact. It's not truth as historic fact. They're not telling us the names of the generals and, you know, the movements of the troops and how many people died. No, they're just telling us the divine powers behind the battle, and it's the journey of the sun. And this is how history is displayed. Okay. Now, this is interesting in the least when you read in Genesis the story of Jacob, who is the founding of Israel. What happens? He returns from Laban. He returns to his land. He stole the birthright from Esau. He's afraid he's going to die. And at midnight, in the middle of the night, he's at a ford and he prays to Yahweh and says, Yahweh, please save me from Esau. And then at the rising of the sun, well, then he battles a personage all night. And then at the rising of the sun, he overcomes the angel or the personage, sees the face of God, and founds Israel and is given a new name, Israel, struggle with God. Okay. That narrative structure is actually identical to what we just read on the Temple of Karnak. The narrative structure follows the underworld journey of the sun as he is being wed to the powers of the cosmos, rises, founds Israel at the rising of the sun. Except the literate Hebrew scribes have changed it. They've detached it from truth as cosmic fact, and they've embedded it actually as truth as historic fact. The historic fact is the covenant with Yahweh. So there's a change that happens. But we can see the fingerprint of the oral tradition in that narrative structure. And we can hypothesize with a pretty good deal of confidence that the origin of that story would have been closer to what we just saw with Ramses. Okay. All right. Well, that's all well and good. This gives us the world of orality and secondary orality. In orality, people think cosmogonically, they think astrologically, they're polytheists or henotheists. Secondary orality, pretty much the same thing, except you develop ritual canons, astrological canons, and you get increased social complexity and empire building. And then with the invention of the alphabet, you get abstract, new layers of abstract thinking, which gives you monotheism and historicism, the birth of history. Okay, we don't get, Herodotus is called the father of history. He writes in the late 5th century BCE. We don't get a Greek writer writing a history by citing another text until the late 4th century BCE. And that really is the birth of the historical model. Okay. And so that comes with a certain kind of writing system and a certain kind of cultural model with it. All right. So now we're going to get into Mesoamerica. What kind of writing system? The apologists say that the Book of Mormon has to occur in Mesoamerica for one simple reason. There's no writing in North America. There's no writing in South America. And it turns out they're right. There is no writing in North America. And the Book of Mormon is a fully literate, it assumes a fully literate civilization. We're going to get into that. Fully literate civilization that is rooted in writing. Now, here's where the apologists err. And they err by thinking that any kind of writing will do. But that's not true. You need reductive, alphabetic, Semitic writing. That's what the Book of Mormon demands. That's what you have to find in Mesoamerica. Mayan writing does not qualify. Let me show you why. Mayan writing was a cosmic artifact. I got to move our image. The writing, was a tool to serve ritual. The glyph for a book in Mayan is this top right image. It's a jaguar. The top cover of the codex was the head of the jaguar. The back cover of the codex was the tail of the jaguar. The jaguar was the dominant divine power. The jaguar with luminescent eyes could see through the night. It could walk through the underworld. It was the apex predator. It had all the powers of nature. And so they used the iconography of the jaguar to represent divinity and nobility. But it also had cosmic power. The spots on the jaguar are the stars. It comes from the divine celestial world. And so writing was the divine incantation. It was an incantation that served a ritual that caused change in the material world from the divine world. That was the source and purpose of Mayan writing. Paper was a divine substance. Paper, again, I'm not going to get into this, but in order to create paper, the bottom left image there, they had, that's a wild fig tree. They took the fibers and they would mash it, much like the Egyptians mashed papyri and lattice networks, pounded it, dried it. But then they had to coat it with gypsum. They used all the elements, fire, water, earth, to create the paper. And they saw paper as it wasn't a thing upon which to write abstract symbols. It was a cosmic artifact on which you performed your ritual. And most of Mayan writing, by the way, they would draw a symbol or an image. They would spill blood on the paper and then burn the paper. And it was the smoke that went up into the celestial world that transformed the writing into the power of the divine, even as the power of the divine was imposed in the writing. This is the thought world of the Maya. So the paper was a divine substance, the writing was a divine substance, and it all served a ritual that was cosmological and astrological. We are deeply in the oral and secondary oral world. We are not in the textual literate world. The Mayan Codex was sympathetic to Mayan architecture. All right, this upper left picture. That is a copy of a page from the Codex of Mexico. There's only 4 Mayan codexes that survive out of presumably thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. So most of it is gone, and we're going to talk about that. But interestingly enough, every codex that survives deals with the Venus cycle and the calendar and rituals associated with the Venus cycle and the calendar. On this page, there is a red line that surrounds the page. Do you see it?
Yep.
There on the right side, there's a red line. When you walk into Mayan temples, you have these big murals that are surrounded by this red line. What the codex page is showing you is the page is synonymous with the temple wall. And what the temple wall is showing you is the temple wall is synonymous with the codex page. The book, the codex book, is not a book. It is a sacred place where you perform your ritual, right? This is a different thought world. But so the writing is a ritual implement. The paper is a ritual implement. The codex is a ritual implement. We have one example of a Mayan history fully written out. That's the Popol Vuh. And it turns out, yeah, again, how fun it would be great to have a podcast on the Popol Vuh, but that is the history of the
you
Mayan,
got it,
and it's entirely mythological. That is cosmological, astrological, mythological. Okay, and so they begin the history of the Maya by saying the history of the Maya takes place in the Ibal, the place to see. This is the Temenos, the sacred precinct, where the priests would gather, recite their history by singing and dancing it at the rising and setting of certain stars. This is the exact thought world we just left with Egypt. Okay, this is what's happening in Mesoamerica.
Hey, John, can I ask you?
You bet.
My literate brain needs to put this in perspective.
You bet.
My understanding is that writing systems, basically 3 places where it actually spawned from nothing, and that was the Middle East, China, and the Mayan area. 400 AD is what I thought I heard for the Mayan alphabet, or are we talking earlier? When and is this what we're considering Mayan writing, or is a codex a simpler?
No, this is an excellent question. There are 6 places where writing emerges: Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, Indus Valley, Mesoamerica. I'm missing one. All right. Mesoamerica is the latest. So how early does the writing go? Well, here's the thing. We have Olmec is the earliest culture.
Mm-hmm.
We have some symbols that date back to 900 BCE, but there aren't many that have been found. And some scholars have argued they represent a writing system. Some scholars have argued we can't know until we get more examples.
And to put that with the Book of Mormon, Olmec would be synonymous with Jaredite.
Yes. The Olmec is the mother culture, 9 to 1500 BCE. Well, 6 to 1500, 4 to 1500 BCE. You know, the Jaredites come from the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
That's
there'd be no writing at all.
There would be no writing.
Everything would be oral. Yes.
Well, if there was writing, it would be secondary orality. It would be writing as ritual. It would be the pyramid texts.
Yeah.
There would be no history, right? The book of Ether gives us a history written by the brother of Jared. Anachronistic, wrong. That does not happen. That's
this
already,
is people who just had their language changed. They certainly couldn't
right.
have a new alphabet already.
the book of Ether is just like Deutero-Isaiah. It is a total anachronism because there is no writing that writes a history in that era. Back to your question, Olmec, 650 BCE. A recent paper has argued that that the Olmec do have a writing system at that point. We do know the Zapotec, which is east, west. Sorry, I got to get my orientations correct. That's Western Mexico. They had a writing system at 500 BCE. The Maya are about 200 BCE forward with writing. Okay. So
this is 200 years, or no, 400 years into Nephite time period before they come up with any writing system
at all.
Well, so these writing systems are borrowing off each other in Mesoamerica. Yeah. Okay. This is another important concept because there's a specific kind of writing that the Book of Mormon has to emerge from. It's not optional. It has to emerge from this kind of writing system. And not only does it not exist, but if it did, it would catch on everywhere. And you don't have it. But in these writing systems, you could argue that Zapotec might be early enough for the Nephite civilization. But the problem is it's the wrong kind of writing. It's this writing here. It's a ritual writing. It's not writing a history. It's performing a ritual. Okay. It's the wrong kind of writing. They're going to think about
that first line. I, Nephi, being born of goodly. It's a history. He's looking back. He's talking about his past. That wasn't even a thought process. That could not exist.
That's a linear
thought right there. The very freaking first line. There's no way their thought process was like that. They were not linear, historical, or literate like that.
Yeah.
No way. That blows my mind.
I am an hour and 45 minutes in. I'm probably got another 45 minutes. So
that's okay. We can't stop now. What do you think, Landon? I think we got to keep going.
I'm learning a ton.
Because now you had to set everything up to begin with. So we can now clearly understand the oral mindset and then the literate mindset like that. And now that we see that, instantly blows the Book of Ether right out of the water, right there. The first line of the Book of Mormon, gone. I mean, it's so clear.
He's already destroyed the Heartland model of the Book of Mormon.
The Heartland model is permanently off the table.
Yeah.
No writing whatsoever. No writing in that area.
No writing whatsoever. We're going to get into the Book of Mormon writing. I have one more slide. It's this slide. And I'm showing you in this slide how the Mayan wrote their history. Okay. And it's very much like the Temple Wall in Egypt. You had these stone stelas, 7 to 9 feet tall, a depiction of the king. Here I'm in Calic Mole, and there's 5 stelas here. There's a couple over to the left. So the king would create 3, 5, 7, 9 stelas. On each stela would be a date, a place, and an event. And that's the entirety of Mayan history. Right? I have a video that I think is really instructive. It's about 2 minutes, but I was in Chichen Itza in March. My guide, Isa, I hired, he reads Mayan. And so we had this conversation at Balam at one of these stelas that the Mayan king had written. And so let's watch it.
We have,
can you hear it?
The West Cliff. And this one is revealing the original name of the city and also the name of the ruler that actually expand and built these rooms and added these stairs and these 2 temples. Right here we have his name, Ukit.
The bottom glyphs or the next glyph?
The next ones.
Yes.
The second one. The second line. So we
That's
have
his name.
So we have Ukit. We have 4 dots. Kan.
Yes. Kan.
Leg Tok.
Pumpkin Jaguar.
It's actually the father of the 4 Flintstone pumpkins.
Flintstone pumpkins.
From the kingdom of Talol. There's
father of the 4 Flintstone pumpkins. That, by the way, is the proper nouns of all the Mayan kings. Just so when we enter the Book of Mormon.
We have the West Cliff. And this one is revealing the original name of the...
That's amazing. That's incredible that he can read that. I mean, that is just wonderful.
And Fred and Barney are the only 2 Flintstones.
Talol.
I was going to say, I did hear the word Flintstone. That did stand out as something I'm familiar with.
The name of the place, name of the king.
And here,
there it is.
They are telling us that he made this 10 rooms.
The event that's being memorialized. And that's the top two glyphs?
Yeah, actually, the whole thing is telling you.
Yes.
He made it wider, he made it bigger, and he is under the button of a crotalus, of a snake tail.
Ah, and there's the snake tongue.
Yes.
So in a serpent, which is a kind of power, cosmic power. Why is he in a serpent?
It's interesting. The old Mayan, they saw a white snake on the sky, the Milky Way.
Yes.
So they took that as a point of reference to state that in the middle is what the important things happen. So they're using this symbolism to represent what is important. So it's a snake body, and all the important events are right in the middle.
So it's a metaphor for the Milky Way, from which emerges important events.
Yes.
So these stelas, though, you find all in Mayan cities. They're like this, right? Name of the place, name of the king,
and what happened here.
Yeah, commemorating an event.
Yes, that's what it is.
That's how Mayan recorded their history.
Yep.
So episodic, boom, snapshot, snapshot, snapshot.
Yeah. They were obsessed about stating what happened and when that happened.
When it happened.
Yeah. And who.
Time, place, person. All very important.
That's true. And also, even though the title, Kalomte, that's the royalty title. And that means Kalomte, the woodcutter, or the warlord.
Nice.
So this king or this ruler went to war too. It makes sense.
Didn't they all?
Yeah, all of them.
All right. Did you hear that?
Yeah, no, I heard that. And what I kept thinking is when LDS people go on these tours, they find a guide that tell them this is the recreation of the story of Christ, and this is a baptismal font, and this is you know what I mean? They want those stories, and the guides know they want those stories.
Yeah,
where
okay.
Here your wonderful guide is telling you what it is exactly. So
sure enough.
You know, I'm not kidding.
John's
No,
going
I
to start
know
doing
you're
Book of
not
Mormon tours now.
I know
No,
you're not
you
kidding.
know, I know. I'm sorry. You know, my
I'm
grandparents
showing
went on
you how
those.
the Mayan recorded their history. Every stela represented an event, and it was an event of the king. And so that would be his birth, his marriage, a victory in a battle, and a ritual. That's it. That's what you got. The place was as important as the event. And the date, because it's all astrological. The names of the kings are astrological, and generally they're named after the day they were born, because that prognosticates their life. And so they have this great sacred calendar, and most of the names correspond to days on the calendar. The history stelas here correspond to days on the calendar, and so it's commemorating the name, the place, and a single event: marriage, ritual, battle. Sometimes the stelas have mythological narratives carved with that. Okay, but that's it. That's all you get with Mayan history making. And so now let's compare that with what we get with the Book of Mormon. Here we have in the Book of Mormon, reading the Book of Mormon, there are over 140 mentions of record keeping and 117 mentions of writing. I've pulled up just a few examples. Mosiah 28:17. The record of the Jaredites gives a historical account of the Jaredites back to the Tower of Babel and to the creation of Adam. Total anachronism. That would not happen. Mosiah 24:5-7. The Lamanites keep records so that they may write one to another. Well, here's another problem. Not only are the Nephites fully literate, that their entire civilization is managed by texts. Okay? They're writing everything. They're recording everything. Their religion is textual. Everything is text-based. But guess what? So is the Lamanites. According to the Book of Mormon, first off, many of the kings of the Lamanites are actually Nephite dissenters, and they're literate Nephite dissenters. They would have brought the writing system with them. But the Lamanites themselves keep records so that they may write one to another. So both the Nephites and the Lamanites are running a fully literate civilization. Mosiah 28:20. All the kings keep a record and hand them down to every generation. The political structure is literate. The kingship is regulated by texts. Everything is written down from generation to generation. Literally, they have to pass a stela down from one king to the next, right?
That's pretty heavy. That's heavy.
It's pretty heavy to do. Pretty heavy to do.
That's why they were so buff. Remember in the Book of Mormon pictures,
right.
it was from carrying around their writings. That's why.
The records of prophecy from all the prophets since the days of Lehi are written down. And so the political structure is kept in writing. The religious structure is kept in writing. The prophecies are kept in writing. Okay, so that's interesting. There are astrological prophecies in writing in the Mayan world, but this is a different kind of religious writing. In fact, Alma 1838, we're told that Ammon teaches the Lamanites from the scriptures, and those scriptures are written records. So what is Ammon using, right? So the religion is fully literate. Records are necessary to keep people living the correct law and bring them to repentance. So that's Alma 37:9, where we're told basically the entire culture is run by a written law. The primary cultural law is in writing and in record keeping. And then Mormon 9:32-33 tells us exactly what kind of writing we should be looking for. Records written in Reformed Egyptian, but hey, we would have written in Hebrew if the plates were sufficiently large. So we know that we know certain things about the writing. And that is, it's got to be Semitic, maybe Egyptian, alphabetic, and that's it. So an alphabetic Semitic writing system. That's what we need to find.
Well, it says they would have written in Hebrew, so we would see Hebrew symbols and Hebrew letters and.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So yes, I got a slide for that. So
you mean all over the Americas? You would see that because
yes.
All over
don't go away. Once all over
Mesoamerica.
Mesoamerica, you would see Hebrew symbols everywhere. Yes. Okay.
Well, you would see an alphabetic writing system.
Yes.
Okay. We can identify alphabetic writing systems if you want to get into that. But I wanted to quote this verse because I used to love this verse as a TBM. I use it all the time on my mission. So sorry, everyone. But this gives you the conception of the religiosity of the Book of Mormon world. It's 2 Nephi 29:9-11. For my work is not yet finished, neither shall it be until the end of man, neither from that time henceforth and forever. Wherefore, because that ye have a Bible, ye need not suppose that it contains all my words. Neither need ye suppose that I have not caused more to be written. For I command all men, both in the east and in the west, and in the north and in the south, and the islands of the sea, that they shall write the words which I speak unto them. For out of the books which shall be written, I will judge the world, every man according to their works, according to that which is written. Revelation and religion is conceived entirely within a literate paradigm. The revelation of Christ is written down in books, and people are judged by the writing in those books. Now, look, 98% of history, there are no books. Another 1.5% of history, all the writing is ritual writing. Only at the very tail end do we get literate religion. Okay. And it never occurs in Mesoamerica. It never occurs in North or South America. Never occurs in the Americas. So what we have then is the word of God is conceived only in fully literate terms. All people receive a testimony of God in Christ will write their testimony down in scripture. This is literate religion.
And when you say it never happens in North or South America, it does post-Columbus.
Post-colonial. Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Thank you. So here's the difference. Mesoamerican text and Book of Mormon text. Mesoamerican text gives us sacred narratives. That is, they've mythologized cosmic facts. That's what we get in Mesoamerican text. Book of Mormon text, we get a history. Event A leads to event B equals event C, which is added to event D, and E equals F, etc. We don't get that in Mesoamerican texts. We get episodic history that's mythologized. Okay? Completely two different genres of history, entirely. In Mesoamerican texts, it's almost all ritual. Book of Mormon texts, we have Isaiah, we have allegories, we have sermons. By the way, these cultures don't produce sermons. They produce rituals. Mesoamerican, they have mythological, you could maybe say an allegory. First off, the allegory of the olive tree is utterly absurd. Yeah. Jacob would never know what an olive tree was, and no one in the Americas would know what an olive tree was. And so why would you spend so much space? It's like 8,800 verses. I don't know. I
never always make that joke so during the sermon. They're like, wait, what was that? What's he talking about? What? You know, he's saying complete gibberish. Nobody can understand.
The allegory is a textual tool.
Yes.
The sermons are products of literate textual thinking.
Yes.
You write a sermon down and then you preach it. In Mesoamerica, you go out and you dance your ritual. There is no sermon, right? The sermon of King Benjamin, anachronistic. The sermon of Abinadi, anachronistic. The sermon of Nephi, anachronistic. Anachronism. Does not belong in Mesoamerica.
We're at the dance of King Benjamin. You might give it a little credibility, right? If everybody turned their tents and Benjamin got up there, and maybe
that's why we have church dances now, so we can mythologize your
ritual. That's right. Oh my gosh, it's just so ludicrous when you start to understand this. Oh my goodness, it's maddening. Actually,
here's the point. So in Mesoamerican texts, we get the date, time, place, single event, where that event is often combined with the myth and the cosmology. Again, in the Book of Mormon, and by the way, we get no monotheism anywhere in the Americas. Again, in the Book of Mormon, truth is historic fact. In the Book of Mormon, that thought world can only be produced by reductive alphabetic writing. Period. You don't get that kind of writing in Mesoamerica. You get logosyllabic writing that serves ritual, serves the cosmology, serves the astrology. It's the wrong kind of writing. So all the text in the Book of Mormon is anachronistic because it's, for decades they argued, look at the Near Eastern biblical sources of the Book of Mormon. Oh my gosh, that's a problem. That's not a proof. That disproves it. That never existed in the Americas. If it did, so, all right, one last thing. In the Book of Mormon, about 80% of the names are related to Hebrew. And the apologists have spent an enormous amount of ink, ironically, proving this. The names extend from the beginning of the story to the end, as well as the Jaredite kings. So the Jaredites are Semitic. The Nephites are Semitic. Rulers of Nephite society held Hebrew names. The lingua franca of Nephite society was Hebrew. Look, whatever the names of your leaders are, that's the language everyone speaks. In the United States of America, besides Barack Obama, who's the outlier, you have presidents named Bill and Joe and Ronald and George and Jimmy. Those are all English names because the lingua franca of the society is English. All right, the rulers' names in the Book of Mormon. Well, here are the Jaredite names. Jared, that's Semitic. Ariha, Aha, Ether, Semitic. Nephite names, Nephi, Mosiah, Noah, Limhi, Semitic. You do get Laconius in, what is that, Helaman? That's a Greek name. I don't know how a Greek name shows up, but boom, there it is, Greek.
I know how. Adieu. That's how. It's just to throw people off.
It's like the French adieu. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's like adieu.
These are proper nouns. Adieu, you could argue, that's a loose translation. You can't argue that with a proper noun. You don't loosely translate the name of a person, place, or thing.
That is such a good point.
You have to tightly translate it word for word, letter for letter. Okay? So Here, this next line, these are the names of the generals at the very end of Nephite civilization. Gidgadonaha, Limha, Moroniha, Antium, Semitic. Okay? From beginning to end, from Jaredite to the very last general, the entire civilization is literate, monotheistic. Well, the religion is monotheistic, and the names are all Semitic. So this tells us we're looking for a reductive alphabetic writing system that's Semitic. Okay. By the way, here's some names of Mayan kings: Bound Stone Jaguar, Sky Witness, First Axe Wielder, Scroll Serpent, Four Stone, Flintstone Pumpkin. Right. Those are the Mayan.
I
kings.
love those.
Those are the Mayan names.
Those names.
I'm
Those
thinking
are
of naming
wonderful names.
I'm recommending these for grandkid names next
No,
time.
but these are
kids come
incredible
over.
names. I know.
So the
Oh
Book
my
of Mormon
goodness.
tags itself, the kind of text that it is. It's sermons, it's letters, it's wars, it's historicity, it's theology, it's monotheism. It tags itself as a thought world that's produced by a specific kind of cultural well. And that cultural well requires a reductive alphabetic writing system, which will create library, schools, and theaters. It will create tens of thousands of texts. Now, look, we're going to talk about what survives and what doesn't survive. But even if you only have 1% of the text survive, you are still going to have thousands of texts. Because as it turns out, wherever we go in the world, only 1 to 5% of it does survive. Only 1 to 5% of Egyptian texts survive. Only 1 to 5% of Mayan texts survive. Of Near Eastern texts survive. Of Chinese texts survive. Only 1 to 5% of all of it survive. And yet, if there's a civilization that leaves a fingerprint, the Nephite civilization is fully literate, it's fully managed by text, it's fully textual, it thinks by text, its theology is by text. You are going to have thousands of texts. You will find them on pottery, tablets, codices, walls, murals, stele, palaces, tombs. You'll find them on wood, clay, stone, woven in textiles. You will find a fingerprint of that. The fact that you find zero reductive alphabetic writing system in Mesoamerica isn't because we haven't discovered it yet. It's because it was never there. Period. You can't be intellectually honest and come to the conclusion that, we just haven't found it yet. I've got a slide for that.
And let me ask you this, because I've heard people say, well, that final battle wiped all of that out, right? All of the linguistic evidence. That's impossible. Even with loss of life or whatever, this would survive, as you described, on everything left.
You are going to find a pottery shard.
Yes.
This civilization is completely textual. Its politics is textual. Its economics is textual. Its language is textual. Its religion is textual. Everything is being managed by text. They're going to produce millions of texts. Millions.
Yes.
And so...
And you already established that the Lamanites were also writing, and they were not wiped
in the
out.
same system, because they're getting it from the Nephites.
Right.
So
and they were
you've got to
out.
find this in the archaeological record. You have to. And if you don't, it's because it wasn't there. All right. So, by the way, we should be finding not only letters, inventories, contracts, receipts, decrees, treaties, literature in that writing system, but literature, scriptures, sermons, histories. Remember, the genre of history is invented by alphabetic literacy. Okay? The Book of Mormon is a history. We should be finding all kinds of histories. We're not finding anything. Monotheistic art. Come on, guys. Even if all your writing is destroyed, you're gonna have one central deity constantly, repeatedly showing up on all of these things: walls, murals, stele, palaces, tombs, all of it.
Right.
And no,
it's not.
No, it's
not there.
All right. So look, here are the arguments the apologists make. Argument number one: we might be looking at Nephite history without recognizing it. So we've got all this iconography and we got the writing, but it's just obscure. It's strange. This actually might be Nephite history, but we're just not recognizing it. This is incorrect. This is the argument they make, and wrong. All Mesoamerican writing and art reflect a thought world that is entirely within the oral or secondary oral world, all of it, right? We know exactly what we're looking at when we look at Mayan iconography. We're looking at polytheism. We're looking at cosmogony. We're looking at the sacred calendar and astrology. We're looking at fertility cycles. We're looking at all of that. That is not Book of Mormon thinking. That is not Book of Mormon theology. So this idea that, well, it might be in the Mayan iconography and writing, we just don't recognize. No, wrong, incorrect. And not only is it not in the iconography of Mesoamerica, it's not in the iconography of South and North America. It's certainly not in the writing of those continents, because there is none. So this apologetic just simply fails. It's just not honest with the material. It's not honest with history. The second argument they make is, because most of archaeology is lost, we can still discover Nephite civilization lurking beneath the jungle, right? Less than 5% of Mayan archaeology was done. That is correct. But guess what? That's true of every culture. We have less than 5% of Roman civilization. This is how much gets lost, right? And yet we have tens of thousands of texts in Roman civilization. The Nephite civilization, its best comparison is Rome, right? It's a fully literate civilization using text to manage every aspect of it, right? Now, I can hear some of the counter arguments, but what I'm saying is history and archaeology do not work that way. Less than 5% of all cultures survive. Nephite civilization was massive and literate. It had millions of people that were literate. At least the ruling class, the economic class, and the religious class was literate with a specific kind of literacy. If we're going to take this as a tight translation, alphabetic literacy. So guess what? We will find a thumbprint.
Just to drive that's interesting, because we went to Fremont State Park with you, and the Fremont civilization was literally hundreds, maybe 1,000 or two, and yet we saw tons of
right, artifacts and writing.
Here's this slide.
It was there.
On the left, I have the top left is Palenque, top right is Chichen Itza. Palenque is Mayan, Chichen Itza Mayan. Bottom left, Teotihuacan, that's Teotihuacanese. Bottom right is La Venta, that's Olmec. So those are three different cultures, four different culture centers over 1,000 different years. We only have about 1% that survives from all these cultures. And yet we have enough to know what kind of society they are, right? We know what kind of writing system they had. We know what kind of religiosity and cosmovision they have, because it emerges from this cognitive model of orality and secondary orality. We know this, right? I study the Fremont. The Fremont were an indigenous culture living in present-day Utah between about 300 and 1300 CE. They had no writing. They were semi-nomadic. Some of them grew maize, bean, squash, but they also roamed, right? And their village sizes generally were between 20 and 40 people. They are almost invisible, and yet we find
and yet they're not
fingerprints everywhere. I could say, oh, Fremont. Here's the cultural identifiers. Here's how I know they're Fremont. Oh, look, hundreds of thousands of rock art images over hundreds of miles. This is their right. It's not really writing, but this is their visual representation of their oral tradition. That is what rock art is. And it's everywhere. So even oral societies are leaving behind this cognitive message from this cognitive model. There's your ritual. There's your calendar. There's the herd moving in. There's the map, right? There's your astrology. It's all in the rock art. I can find that with villages with 20 to 40 people. And yet somehow Nephite civilization that has millions of people, which must have an alphabetic writing system in order to get monotheism and the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Somehow I don't have any of that. Zero. Stop. You're not going to find it in the next 10% of archaeology done. You're not going to find it in the next 50% of archaeology done. You're not going to find it because it wasn't there. Period. We would have already found it.
I was just going to say that you would have already seen it. Absolutely.
And so I'm going to end. How am I doing? Yeah, I've totally.
No, there's no time here. This is a conversation out of time. No worries whatsoever.
I'm going to end with this image here. This is about 50 feet from a rock art panel where there's a UFO. Do you see the flying saucer? Yep. Someone inscribed on the rock face, and actually behind my text block, there's a person being beamed up into the UFO. Well, guess what? I've looked at thousands of rock art panels. I can say with 99.9% probability, this is a modern graffiti. I can say that because this is an anachronism. There were no flying saucers 1,000 years ago amongst the indigenous peoples, right? The Book of Mormon is a textual graffiti. It does not exist in the thought world of Mesoamerica or any of the Americas. We are specific. We know exactly what to look for. We are looking for a Semitic speaking people with an alphabetic script that is fully literate and running their entire civilization from texts. Their religion is textual. Their theology is rooted in literacy and history. That's what we're looking for. We find that nowhere. What the Book of Mormon is then? Oh my gosh. 2 hours, 15 minutes. I'm gonna blow through these.
Stop worrying about the time. Right. I'm not kidding. This is very important. And no one has heard this before.
Guys, I'm new to this podcast world. I look at these podcasts and they're like 6 hours long. I'm sorry. I go, I'm out.
No, do you know what? There's such a thing. It's called playback speed. You can listen to it at 2.0, but a concept like this, it doesn't come easily to understand. Well, and you have to take people through it. And by the time, hopefully, our viewers are at this point, your mind is blown and you're going, how did I even think ever that this was a possibility without realizing what it wasn't?
Sure enough. Look, I've spent a couple hours and really it is 1 or 2 weeks of graduate school lectures where I talk about oral cognition and how
we get college credit for this podcast.
Yeah, mythological cultures develop and how they transmit information, and we go through mythologies and I've done this all in 2 hours. So I've done the best. It's
pretty impressive. Stop worrying about the time.
I'm pretty dumb. So I hope there's plenty of drinking going on.
That's what I thought the whole time you were talking. I said, this guy's an idiot,
Yeah, total idiot. Has no idea what he's talking about. No, the beauty of it is that you can explain this so that we can understand it. Yeah. That's the beauty of it. We do understand what you're saying. And now we're at the best part where we can apply it. So please keep talking.
Let me go through point number 2 then. Once you understand the cognitive model, that there is no cognitive model in the Americas that can produce the text of the Book of Mormon, then you understand the text is an anachronism. It's a textual graffiti, like that UFO on the rock panel. A tight translation is impossible. Again, you need all those things that we just discussed in order for a tight translation to exist. Suddenly, we have a new category. It's called a loose translation. And the Mormon scholars have developed this category recently. And the reason why they've developed it is because they recognize there are problems with the tight translation. I've just shown you the entire text is an anachronism, all of it. From Jaredite to Nephi to the certain, all of it. It doesn't belong in the thought world of Mesoamerica. And I understand what scholars do, but it's all anachronistic. So now we have to, but they can argue, this is their third argument, it's a loose translation. We're not getting a word-to-word translation, we're getting a world-to-world translation. And so this is their final argument, is, okay, so sure enough, the text is anachronistic, but Joseph Smith created it. He converted whatever was on the gold plates into this, And so we're going to call it a loose translation, still divinely inspired. Mel, it's your check. All right. And I am saying a tight translation is impossible. And that is your stopgap, by the way, because that is required. Now, I'm not going to get to that part tonight. However, a loose translation is even worse. A loose translation is an act of violence. So let's just talk about real quick what a tight translation is. First off, we have at least 3 scribes, Emma Smith, Martin Harris, David Whitmer, all attest to the translation process, which is a word-for-word dictation, including spellings of names or long words. So Joseph Smith, he says there's a written record on plates. He is recording it, and he's transcribing it word for word by reading words off a stone in a hat, and he spells out words, right? Such as these new words. He's got proper nouns, Leahona, Deseret, Kurlam, Kumam, Ziph, Zenine, right? These are proper nouns that he spells out letter for letter. How does this come from a loose translation, a world to world? How are you spelling out proper nouns using a loose translation? You can't. So even someone like Brant Gardner, who is doing his best to try to argue that the Book of Mormon is a literal historical, says that, well, parts of it have to be a tight translation, such as the names, but parts of it are a loose translation, such as Deutero-Isaiah. So already this is intellectually dishonest territory, because now you're going to pick and choose, right? Here's a tight translation. It's a name. Well, this doesn't quite work. Let's call it a loose translation.
It works perfectly. I love it.
It actually does work perfectly, doesn't it?
It does work perfectly. That's what's so frustrating about it.
Oh, no, hold on, let me finish. So, in addition, in the text, there are Hebraisms and linguistic structures, chiasmus, parallelisms, idioms, allegory, naming puns, wordplay. These are all literary structures. How do you loosely translate that? There is no loose translation of that, right? And finally, Joseph Smith never, ever intimated this was a loose translation. He always said, I am translating a record of an ancient people. It's a literal history. It's a literal text. There's no mention of a loose translation until just recently, when they started to realize parts of this can't be a tight translation. So we're going to invent a new category. Well, let's just spend 2 minutes thinking about what a loose translation is. What is being written on the plates? The source text, okay, is the plates. What is being written on it? What is being conveyed? If the ideas on the plates match the ideas in the text of the Book of Mormon, right? You have a sermon. King Benjamin's sermon, right? Give to the poor, sacrifice, follow Jesus. If those ideas are on the plates and we get them in the text of the Book of Mormon, then a loose translation is unnecessary and even distortive. If the ideas are matching, then it's a tight translation. Just translate the matching ideas, a word-to-word translation. Now, here's the thing. If it is a word-to-word translation, can you reverse engineer the ideas back into Mesoamerican texts? Oh, hell no. You cannot at all. So,
nope.
There's nothing of the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerican texts. So then what, again, is being written on the plates? Well, if the ideas on the plates do not match the ideas in the text, and this is the argument, then a loose translation is objectionable and intellectually dishonest. A world-to-world translation is destructive. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. But if the ideas on the plates do not match what's on the paper, what is going on? What is the very idea of a loose translation if you can change whatever ideas are on the plates into whatever ideas you want?
God would be lying to you if God was the power behind the translation.
The first person to object against the loose translation is God.
Yep.
He's the first person to say, no, I never engineered that. Nope. Right. So the ideas on the plates have to match the ideas on the text. Otherwise, it's just capricious and destructive. You can do whatever you want. Right. So there's this, do the ideas match? And then, of course, there is, look, did this happen or not? This is a history. Did a group of people from Jerusalem come with a text and create a set of gold plates? And did they invent a civilization? Did Jesus appear and teach the Sermon on the Mount? Did these things happen or did they not? And if not, if we can loosely translate any idea into modern Christology, then how far can we go with that? Right? I mean, can members today loosely translate the words of modern day prophets?
I think they do.
Well, you know what? It's valid. If the apologists can say loose translation of the ancient text, why can't a modern Mormon say loose translation of the modern revelation? It's a valid. It's valid because none of this is honest. All right. So let's just go.
No, it is valid because I feel like you see different apologists, progressive and orthodox, and they are translating what they feel, living what they feel is actually the gospel. And it's very different. It's a loose translation from both of them, and they feel that it's accurate. So,
yeah, you know, what I'm arguing is that the text has to be a tight translation or it's capricious mumbo jumbo. So, I mean, here you go. Can any set of deities who require sacrifice be made to represent Jesus Christ? Let's say the deities on your plates are a different thought world kind of deity, and they do require sacrifice. And Joseph Smith says, oh, loose translation, I'm going to turn this deity into Jesus Christ who sacrifices himself. Is that legitimate? Well, if you can do that, then it turns out every deity in history is Jesus Christ. You get Osiris is Jesus, Marduk is Jesus, Buddha is Jesus, Leshvar is Jesus, Zeus is Jesus. You can do that to any deity.
Don't we see him trying to do that with Quetzalcoatl in Mexico? This is Jesus, the serpent.
Quetzalcoatl,
Jesus.
I don't know how a serpent with fiery, is Jesus.
Totec is Jesus. So can any deity that represents sacrifice be made to represent Jesus Christ? I argue no. Jesus is a specific idea and person in history, and the idea in the Book of Mormon is Christian is a Christology. So were those ideas on the plates? If they were not, then guess what? It's a fraud. It's a fraud. But again, let's argue loose translation. What is being loosely translated? Can any deity, so can any set of ideas that represent sacrifice be made to represent atonement? We have this huge sermon on infinite atonement by Abinadi. We don't get anything like that in any Native American culture because that is a product of literate thinking. That sermon is a product of New Testament literate thinking. What we get in Native America, so here's what we get: human sacrifice. In proved Mesoamerica, you offer a head and a heart to the deities to bring the cosmic powers to the land. Is that now representing one's thoughts and desires in the atonement? Right? Clearly, if we are making that the translation from the plates to the text, we are doing both the plates and the text a disservice, right? So you can't change the deities from the plate. You can't make a world-to-world translation without perverting one of the worlds, if not both. And that's why a loose translation is an act of violence. What in a world-to-world translation, how far is one permitted to alter the first world into the second? If this process is done to any religion in any space and time, doesn't all just turn into the paradigm of one's choosing? And this changes the definition of truth. You're no longer translating direct concept to concept, idea to idea, theology to theology, grace to grace, works to works. You're making it up as you go. That's what a loose translation is.
So you're saying it is a loose translation because they were making it up as they went.
Well,
or maybe a catalyst, right? Don't get us started on that, right? Oh my goodness.
Well, so that
Trexmo, I love this.
Guys, oh, you threw up a Trexmo. That's right.
The catalyst theory is the same category. The catalyst theory is the loose translation theory.
Yes.
The catalyst theory is there is no ancient text. The ideas on the ancient papyri do not match the text written in the Pearl of Great Price. So we are just going to create the world in the text, and we'll call it the catalyst theory, but all that is this loose translation. You're making it up. It's the same category. In fact, so here's your Trexmo that I grabbed, Rebecca. It's brilliant. Mr. Spock, give me the readings. It's not so much what the readings say, Captain. It's what they make me think of. That's absolutely ridiculous, Mr. Spock. This catalyst bullshit is going to get us killed. It's the same thing. The loose translation, the catalyst theory, that's not intellectually honest. Do the ideas on the papyri or on the plates match the ideas in the text? If they do, it's a tight translation. If they don't, it's dishonest. You don't get to argue that. And where in the world, anywhere else in the world, do scholars translate loosely? Where?
Exactly.
Right. Those pyramid texts, you know what? No one understands what they mean, but it's still a tight translation. You're getting a word to word. The first text you encounter, this is where it gets rated R. The first text you encounter in the Pyramid of Unas, there in the passage on the right, is I can't quote it, but it's something like the baboon rears its anus to the sky, the baboon's sacred anus. It's all about the baboon's anus. And you're like, what the hell is this?
That sounds like a tight translation to me.
These Egyptians really love the baboon's anus. But here's the thing, even though scholars don't know what it means, they have only one choice: to translate what the words say, right? Nowhere in the world is there anything such as a loose translation. And nowhere in Mormonism was that even argued until really just in the past 2 decades. Exactly. And they only argue it because a tight translation becomes problematic. Well, actually, a tight translation is impossible. There is no writing system that can produce the Book of Mormon. There is no writing system that can produce the Christology and the historicity of the Book of Mormon. There is no cultural envelope. There is no cultural well that produces these thought structures in Mesoamerica, South America. None of it. And so you're left arguing what Mr. Spock is arguing. It's not really what it says. It's what it makes me think of. That's exactly. The loose translation is the Deus Ex Machina of Mormon apologetics. It's whatever they want it to be. And so that's their get out of jail free card, which they will use until, that
until they watch this podcast.
You can't argue out of non-rational discourse. I mean, look, here's the deal. The Book of Mormon began in a magic worldview. It is now being defended by a magic worldview. A loose translation is a magic worldview. It's whatever we can create. Joseph Smith received revelations. The text is irrelevant. The plates are irrelevant. The papyri is irrelevant. It's the revelation of the Lord. It's a magic worldview. And so that's what a loose translation is. And to me, it's profoundly intellectually dishonest. So anyway, I'm going to end it there. So that was 2.5 hours. Sorry. It
doesn't even matter. But do you know what? I love that last point that you made. The magic worldview is coming back. And we see that everywhere. 20 years ago, you would never admit there was a rock, let alone a hat or anything. And now we just visited the Family History Center. These guides who are older than we were glibly told us how amazing it was that they could peep into a stone. I believe that they are promoting and encouraging the magic worldview because that's the only way people will be able to continue to believe in the historicity of things.
Well, first
It's
off,
brilliant.
30 or 40 years ago, you could get excommunicated for promoting
Yes,
the rock and that.
Yeah.
that's what I mean. That's what I'm
and
saying.
So what I mean, that is deeply offensive, right?
Yep.
And but so look, they keep retreating to the bottom line is the archaeology will never support the Book of Mormon. So they just are retreating to whatever will work. And it was 40 years ago where you had to believe it literally, historically, or you were out. And
Yep.
you were disciplined, right?
Yep.
Now it's okay, let bygones be bygones. All those people we excommunicated or got rid of or shamed into silence, it'll work out in the next life. Osiris, Avalokiteshvara, Marduk, it doesn't matter, right? So as long as the obedience and the allegiance and the money keeps rolling in, we're good. So this is where they're retracting to. But I don't know of any. I just, you listen to Mormon apologists. I don't want to be condescending. I actually know some of these people. I like them. I think they're good people. They spend a lot of time showing the textual biblical roots of the Book of Mormon text. That's an anachronism. There shouldn't be textual biblical roots in the writing system in the Book of Mormon. And if there is, then we're going to find an alphabetic writing system in Mesoamerica or in any of the Americas, and you don't. So the further this goes, there's no DNA, there's no writing system, there's no historicity,
right. No artifacts.
There's no artifacts. The proper nouns are wrong. The archaeology is wrong. None of it is being held. And now there's no spectacles. It's a rock and a hat. There's no Abraham papyri. It's a catalyst theory. It's
too overwhelming. There's too many gymnastics that have to be done.
It's too much. It's all crumbling away. Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's a problem.
Yep, you simply can't make it work is the problem.
You cannot make it work except for to just simply have faith. Faith to ignore all of this, everything we talked about tonight and everything that was just mentioned. If you have the faith, you can ignore all of it.
Look, if I could just speak on that. I know it's late, but
you're fine.
When I was 16, I read the Book of Mormon and had a profoundly spiritual experience. And I was a TBM and I believed in that spiritually. I still believe in that spiritual experience because I read the text as a devotional to a worldview of self-sacrifice and service. Modern Christology. That's how I read it. You know what? If you read the Book of Mormon in that way, there's much to be gained, right? And a lot of Mormons do. And so they'll never listen to a podcast like this because they have a conversion experience. That's all that's left. That's all that's left to defend the historicity of the Book of Mormon. No, actually, there's nothing left to defend the historicity of the Book of Mormon. It's all that's left to defend the ideology of the Book of Mormon is the personal devotional experience. Here's the deal. Sorry, that's not enough. When you walk around and call yourself the Lord's anointed and ask for 10% of people's income, you don't get to walk around and say, have a personal devotional experience, especially when you've set up the entire religion based off this is a literal history. And from that, we have literal priesthood keys, and that gives us the authority to require all the things we require of you, right? You don't get to do that. So you have to show up. You have extraordinary claims that need extraordinary evidence. Tonight, I've just looked for mundane evidence, and there's none, zero. So you don't, I think a devotional approach to the Book of Mormon is what will keep people in the church, but that is not the standard of proof for the Book of Mormon. And when you put the standard of proof down, it collapses. So there you go.
And that's why we see now they're saying it's not a historical book, it's a spiritual book. And they're going completely away from that and saying, hang your hat on that textbook. Spiritual manifestation, because there is no historical manifestation.
They are moving that direction, and may they all burn in hell. That is just disgusting. It's disgusting. Yeah. How dare
to those of us raised the other way, it is, because it flies in the face of everything we were told we had to believe, and things would never change.
That's right. That is right. If you're going to make that move, you got to come out and repent first. You got to say, here's everything we said. Here's everything we demanded. Here's what we're changing now. If you come out and do that, that'll be your first Mormon prophet. Until then, you got something else.
Well, this was great, John. Wow.
Oh my gosh.
You blew. This is what I was hoping for. What you just did is what I was expecting that would happen, and you did not disappoint. I was like,
did not disappoint. No, and I feel like there's more to say. Not tonight, but I feel like there's more. There's several other episodes of things that we can even go back and discuss. So this has just been absolutely incredible. Landon, do you want to recap or point 3? There it is. He's teasing us. Oh no.
Screen sharing to stop. Yeah. I have 20 more slides.
He does. And that's why we're going to have you come back, because I think right now you've given us milk, and then, we'll come back later for meat. No, I hate to use that phrase. I hate that. Absolutely. But no, it's just incredible. And the way you took us through it to understand, I mean, number one, we just learned so much about the history of language and the oral versus the, the literary, and then to understand and compare that to Mesoamerica. It's just, I don't know why I feel sad, kind of. Do you feel sad a little bit, Landon? I don't know. Just that I wasn't aware of this before. I didn't know the things that I just chose not to think about. I feel, I don't know, a little disappointed in myself.
I can understand that, but I feel elated because I was just given knowledge that I'd never had before, that I'm just going away going, wow.
Yep,
wow,
energized. It was a little remorse. Wow. Yep, I feel so too. So I think this is where we'll end, and we'll just say thank you so much to John. It was absolutely incredible. I know that this is going to make a big splash. I know there's going to be lots of questions. I hope that our viewers will please comment. Please tell your friends about this video, about this concept. We're going to try to get some shorts out, just some of the major points so that people can understand. But it's really important to watch this entire thing so that you can really get a concept. What was that? Shorts? No, you can make sure. I know we just learned how to do it. Well, we have friends that know how to do it, but no, some of these points are so powerful that it's important to be able to have people understand what this is, and then encourage them to come back and watch the entire thing from beginning to end, because it was so incredible. So if you guys would like to receive notifications of when new episodes drop of Mormonish, you can hit the notification bell. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. We have incredible friends and guests that come on, like John, and they're just brilliant. I mean, they just break your mind completely open. If you would like to support or donate to Mormonish, we absolutely appreciate and love our viewers so much. And we do have information on how you could help out the channel monetarily if you'd like in our show notes. And again, this was just incredible. And we thank Landon and we thank John, and we will have future episodes with John, if not help him launch his own podcast. I'm not kidding. So goodbye from Mormonish from now. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.